Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in. Well, hey, Morgan. How's it going?
How's it going? Long time no see, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm excited for our episode today. I think it's going to be pretty fun and kind of informative, hopefully, for our listeners as well.
Yeah, I feel like we're really, kind of diving into that, applying psychology to the workplace. Definitely, Elizabeth, this is huge for you. I know this is kind of where you find yourself a lot of times. For me as well, it's funny enough, it's a focal point for me right now. We're focused on our sales team and our sales training. And so we kind of talked about, the sales job description. Now we're going to talk about training for that job description and kind of, the applicability of those tests we were talking about earlier, those personality tests and aptitude tests when it comes to the training world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's so many different ways that people can train and onboard and all of that. And I've seen organizations that kind of have I'm going to say a little bit of a one size fits all solution for training folks. But I would argue and have argued in client sites and also in places I've worked that different areas or different departments like sales need a different strategy because the work is different, right? It kind of makes sense just logically, right?
Yeah, and the people are different. I mean, your personality is going to attract people differently, and then different people are going to get attracted to the company in different ways. And so because of that, you kind of have to teach the intricacies of people in general, and of course, psychology has to apply, right? So it's definitely an interesting a topic that we're going to kind of go through, talking a little bit about the training side of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, all the things you said are absolutely right. And I think too that with sales in particular, there's the industry matters, the type of company matters. Like this is another place where I know we've said this in other episodes, but the context matters so much, right?
Yeah.
Are you selling a product? Are you selling a service? What does that all look like? I mean, the way that you sell is very different. And I think we've also said this before too, maybe a little bit of a broken record, but I think anybody in a company, regardless of their position, is selling at any given time. If I ask Morgan what do you do for work? Just your elevator pitch is selling, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not selling as we, would typically think about it, but selling nonetheless. So
I know I've said the line, if you're in business, you're in sales. The really important piece though is teaching and training in a way that is good for the person and good for the company. A training program in general is important when someone comes onto a team, but training specifically to your process is what most people focus on and what needs to be focused on. Training to the industry though, and training to the person. One size doesn't fit all. I've talked about it with lots of companies that I've worked with where, this might be the blueprint for a new intervention that you're doing in your team or a new initiative because someone externally brought it to you, but we actually have to apply that to your workplace. If you're not purposefully using techniques and, attaching them to the way in which the company functions, it's not going to be successful. The same thing for training in people. If you're not training in a way that's conducive to that person's learning, it's not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and kind of going back to our previous episodes, I think that is a place where some of that data can be really helpful, right? You may have, and I like what you said about the blueprint, because I totally see it that way too. It's you kind of have a foundation, right? Or you have this map of what it's going to look like. And you may have some foundational elements that every new employee, regardless of their position, goes through. And right, there's the rest of it too, right? There's, how are you teaching them to sell? How are you integrating the data that you have, both from your conversations during the interview process, as well as, assessment data, if that's something that, you deployed during the process. How can you tailor that experience so the individual can really, get off like up and running, I guess, more quickly, and help them be successful from from the beginning. Because, there's also an emotional standpoint there too. When we experience success and those small wins, it makes us more motivated to want to continue to grow and learn and sell.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and investing time and effort into those sales training programs is going to bring an ROI, a return on investments, because sales training is very clearly connected to sales performance capabilities. People are going to sell more and do better in their sales and sell more in a more quality manner if they're trained to do so. So you don't have to be worried about your training programs not bringing that ROI. Even a bad training program, in the sense of bad where it's not as effective, not bad meaning you're teaching the wrong things, but bad as though it's not as effective, is still going to bring it some sort of ROI, right? So imagine if you invest more time and more money, more effort into that training program, that ROI is going to be exponentially better.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I have some examples in my mind too of training programs that I've helped develop for sales folks. But in your world, what have you found to be helpful? Do you have any specific examples of things that are helpful?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say is write it down. So that's something I really ingrained in people. I was like, you can't, not only are you training them, and yes, you need to train them the how to and show them what to do, and they need to practice and do it, but having some sort of written down format or formulation process is very helpful, because maybe they forget a step of the 10-step process, but they know the other 9 steps. Well, they don't necessarily need to ask you and interrupt your day or interrupt someone else's day. It's written down. It's right there. So that's the first thing I do note is, when it comes to the actual black and white physical doing of the job, write it all down. It really should be written down. Sometimes techniques, also writing those down. That's helpful. So that's the first thing I know. That's the less effective, right? Training program is a just written down one. But that's the first step.
If I can jump in, I think because on that point, right, one of the things I really like to do, and it may just be a little bit of my personality style, but is kind of creating process charts or flow charts, especially if it is, something that is very kind of structured, the sales process, right, or the life cycle of a sale, right? Having that in kind of a visual format and also written down in a narrative format, I think can be really beneficial and is one way to kind of meet people where they're at, right? Because I'm a visual person. I like to see the chart.
A lot of people are visual. I'm visual.
Yeah. But other people, that doesn't really, it's less meaningful for them, right? And so kind of having a multi-method or multi-modality for how you present the information can really be beneficial.
Yeah, presenting it in multiple ways. For example, we've shown it in, a general view, like a snapshot view, and that helps people with the overall process understanding. But we've also shown them it in a more written step-by-step in all the intricacies view. We've shown it in overall, like 10 major steps of the sales process, but we also have like you said, visual model. As humans, we are creative beings. And, for those that have the capability when it comes to visuals and visual learning, that it's so important, because it's more like your brain's more likely to go back to that and picture that visual than they are to just picture written down words on a page. So that's definitely a very important piece. Thank you, Elizabeth, for adding that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely create, if for every system, I probably would create a flow chart, because that's just kind of how I am. But yeah, I like the kind of the multi-method approach to different things. And, there's a lot of systems too. I know that places that I've worked in or with as a consultant, they have different systems, like an LMS system, a learning management system that it can be used in a lot of different ways. Again, they're not all the same. So, our listeners might work somewhere where you have an LMS system. Some may not. But I think, there have been opportunities for me to be really creative in how that information is presented, making it more interactive. So if I'll provide an example of a sales training technique that we used. We were kind of just finding in this organization that people weren't all speaking the same language, right? When asked about, what does company X do? What do you sell? And it was a service provider. people just weren't really speaking the same language. And so we were trying to figure out, like, how can we be efficient at getting everybody on the same page, I guess more quickly. That's what efficient means. But also, get them what they need. And so one of the pieces of our LMS system allowed for us to kind of offer some examples, some videos of people in the company selling or introducing the client and the service, right? And then had the new employee record themselves doing the same. And that immediately then went to their manager, who could say, hey, here's some feedback, try it this way. And they could kind of do it, interactive in that way. Yes, we can do that in person, and we definitely did. But when you have a sales team, in this case of 50 people, it's not always as possible. So to have that tool kind of to help really was effective in that situation. Which was pretty cool.
Sales is a very remote environment. Even if it's an in-person company, it's a very remote environment for sales, especially when you're thinking of services that aren't in-person services. And so because of that, it's some interaction piece that makes it so, you're building a relationship with your manager, you're building a relationship with your team, and that way it's a more cohesive, collaborative environment that enacts things and says things kind of in the same manner, like, as you said, speaking the language. I definitely, whenever I'm developing a training program, there are activities involved in it. Even if it's a presentation, there are activities involved in it. Even if I'm taking just, the typical, say, harassment training that Massachusetts is required to do yearly. A lot of states are required to do it yearly, but say it's that harassment training. I will take the blueprint training that Massachusetts provides, and I will pause it and I will ask questions during it, because I'm trying to make it more interactive, keep people engaged. That's also, important. One other piece for you, Elizabeth, is, have you used scripts before? I know sales people tend to use scripts. It sounds like kind of what you were developing there is a more verbal format of a script rather than a written down one.
Yeah, no, I absolutely have, and I think what I've noticed over time is it's that resource, having a script, is very helpful for people kind of early on, as they're, not even just early on in their career, but just early on in the company that they're working for, right? Because it's always just a little bit different depending on the organization that you're in, again, industry, all of those things. But yeah, kind of, just having a script in place. And then, I found that people start to make it their own, but by having that script, again, you create that blueprint or that foundation. And so the essence of what they're saying is the same, right, across the board amongst all of the sales employees, even though the words might sound a little bit different as they get more comfortable in talking about the service or product that they sell.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, start with that blueprint. Starting with the blueprint is usually learning the software programs. It's learning the forms that the sales team uses. It's using the scripts that exist. So it's that hard skill knowledge of the company. That's where it all starts. But then when you get to the activity portion or the practice portion of things, you want people to, use those sales muscles, even in a practice format instead of a real format. And that way, that they're doing things right. They're kind of on the right path. So yes, they can conform to their personality while following, the hard skills they've been taught with the software and the methods of the company, but ensuring that, when they are customizing it to themselves in a way, it is effective. And so that's kind of that next step. And practice is so important, as well as a review of practice is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's kind of cool with, and we don't have to get into a technology conversation here right now, but I will say that, just having CRM systems, or the customer relationship management systems, which a lot of sales folks use, a lot of companies use, but of course sales, they're really kind of heavily invested in it typically. I've seen a lot of really cool advances where the emails are just automatically synced into the client file within the CRM. And I think that is maybe even a missing piece, that when we think about training folks, there is so much information sitting in this system. Let's use it, right? When you think about writing email templates or scripts or whatever it may be, or just kind of wanting to see like, hey, what did this look like? This was a $10,000 deal versus $1 million deal. Well, what was different about the language? And I think that's another way to engage people. It's just by pulling some of that information that is already at your fingertips and then having people pick it apart so that, because they're learning actively at that,
Yeah.
through that experience.
Taking the example and replicating it, just
Yeah.
like what you were talking about. Our CRM, I mean, Salesforce is a very common one that I've heard a lot of people use. My company, we use NetSuite, and it's a very intuitive program, connects bookkeeping and manufacturing as well as HR if you want right to it. While we don't use it for HR right now, we could if we wanted to. We just are working with a different company for that stuff. But those programs are so intuitive and they take a lot to learn. They really do. But if you have those email scripts or campaigns in there, it's helpful to utilize those resources more effectively and connecting it to the sales process, whether that be the verbal process, the process of connecting your own sales process, your personal sales process based off your personality to the system. It's using it in multiple ways, replicating that example in a way that you would approach it. I know for my salespeople, when I'm training or helping train, I'm not necessarily directly training them any longer, though I have in the past. I make them do mock sales. I call them mock sales. So we have a fake customer set up. It's our company, and they utilize our company's customer card to make fake sales, to practice. So they start by replicating, and then they start doing random ones that are just put out there, but they're repeating. So each person that gets trained is doing the same ones. So they're evaluated on the same ones.
Yeah. This is making me think of kind of a relation to something we've said before a little bit. I know we were talking about leadership and we were talking about the difference between kind of management and leadership, right? And developing those skill sets. And I can see kind of a nice, it's similar in this way too, right? Yeah. It's the process, the technical side of sales, right? How do you use the CRM? How do you send your emails? How often do you follow up? All of those things. Those are very technical aspects of the role. But then there's also this, similar to in leadership, right? The finesse of selling. And I think that part of it, in my mind, is where a lot of times the psychology really comes into play. A lot of those assessments that people do can give you some information about what might that look like and what areas could we work on to help you to have more finesse kind of in your selling strategy. If that makes sense. I'm kind of just seeing a little bit of a similarity there.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection. I mean, when you're training, you're also developing people. You're developing people in a way that, aligns with themselves and aligns with the company's needs. And for us people in psychology, but then also a lot of people in the hiring world know it as hard skills and soft skills.
Right.
That's what it is. You develop soft skills and you train hard skills usually, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I see. I see that intersection, just as you do. So there's one other piece that, I was kind of thinking about earlier is, it's a process. You need to get people to this level of success. And it's a process of practicing, giving feedback, the like. And so I actually think of a theory in psychology. It's called situational leadership. So in situational leadership, you treat people differently accordingly based off of, their personality, their natural motivation, and the like. But I actually apply situational leadership theory to training. And so I don't know if you know him, Elizabeth, you probably do. I would highly doubt you don't know. But situational training is you have directing, also known as telling. Then you have coaching, supporting, and then delegating. Sounds like that's how training goes, right? First, you tell someone how to do something. Then you're coaching them how to do it. So, you're a part of the process still, though they're doing it a little more on their own. Then you're supporting, you're there to give extra feedback, but they're working more independently until finally you've delegated it. They're working entirely independently. I cover those 4 steps with all of my managers when they're training people. This is the route you go, is you dictate, you tell them what to do, then you coach them on how to do it and what to do again. And then you support them, changing anything that needs to be improved. And then finally, there can be an independent employee and really have that autonomy to feel naturally motivated and feel meaning in their work.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that model, and I definitely know what you're talking about. I've used it as well. It's very to pull in more psychology pieces too. It's very developmental, right? The idea is I mean, in essence, I think the term is scaffolding, right? We're creating a scaffold upon which, people create a base, and then they're able to build and then build and build, and it just kind of keeps going. And I think that I think just in general in training, that's a great strategy. With the situational leadership side of it too, is you may have somebody who comes in that kind of doesn't need that first step. And so part of it is kind of getting to know them and where on the ladder can you start with them? But also knowing that it can be a little bit agile as well. And so you may need to go back at times, right? Especially when you think about, an individual who maybe has a lot of responsibilities, or rather, has a lot of different products that they sell, right? So I work with a lot of technology companies who sell different products, particularly in the Microsoft space, right? And they may be selling 3 different products, right? They're selling the service to kind of implement the product, but selling those products. And so when you have somebody who's really fresh and really new and maybe doesn't know a lot about, what is Power Platform, what is Dynamic CRM, all that kind of stuff, you kind of have, in some ways, start with one. At least this is what I found to be effective. Start with one. Start with, Dynamics. Let's say I'm just going to use Microsoft as the example, but start with Dynamics, help them learn that, help them learn how to sell that. And then you kind of go back down on the ladder again and say, okay, now we're going to learn Power Platform, right? And
go kind of piece by piece.
Yeah.
Humans get overwhelmed. Yeah. Humans get overwhelmed. We cannot we truly don't, go back and forth. We truly can't multitask. It's more so of how quickly you can refocus on that task more than anything. And so because of that, if you can make someone an expert in one area and then make them an expert in the next and the next, that's how you do it. For example, at our company, we have so many different product lines. So the first step is make them an expert in medallions. That is truly the first step. Focus on the Made in USA medallions, and then focus on those more complicated die cast medallions. I know some of that terminology might go over people's heads. Don't worry. It's just an example, but focus on medallions. Then we go to focusing on different types of awards. Then we go to focusing on apparel. So it's a step-by-step learning. Become an expert in what's most sold, what's the most common product, or maybe even what's the easiest to learn if they're the same, they have the same sales numbers across the board, and then go to the next one. It's build gradually. Use that 3-month typical probationary period to really train someone. Someone's not going to be trained in 2 weeks. They might be, but it has to be a very simple job.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that, using the example that you provided with your own company, you may, let's just imagine that you have a sales employee that comes from a competitor who made other, die cast metals and all of that, which I know that terminology only because I've talked to you about it a million times. Yes. But I know it's just a type of metal for those who are curious. Can check it out if you want. But you may not have to start at ground zero because they already know what die cut metals are. They know what it means. They know the process of how they're completed and what they look like in the end, right? And so that may be a different approach. But again, that's that tailoring of the training or onboarding experience based on the person you have in front of you. Some people need to start. I've done this pretty much everywhere I've gone. Creating just an acronym sheet for people, because as you get into training, acronyms get hard, especially if you're new.
We have an acronym sheet too.
So it's you may need to start with the acronym sheet, or you may have people coming on that know all the acronyms already because they've been in the industry for a while.
Whether it be, for example, our sales manager, she came from the jewelry industry. It is exactly connected to the way in which our industry works. It's just a different type of customer. So we're teaching her about the customers, but we don't have to teach her about the products, right? And then, same thing, someone might come in and know Salesforce, and you use Salesforce. So you don't actually have to really teach them the Salesforce program. You have to teach them how you specifically use it, but they already know the program. So they're coming in with, kind of that edge, that step above others. Or, maybe they come in with a great knowledge of how a sales process works, the different techniques for sales. They might come in with that. And so then they only need to learn the products and the system perhaps. So definitely there's multiple parts. There's the CRM, there's the product or service, and then there's the industry, the customers. So you're teaching three major areas. And so one they might have already an understanding of. And so you really want to focus on the others at that point, or you're going to enter them into the training at different points. So perhaps you're just supporting in customer service, and then in products, you're dictating, you're teaching them from the bottom up. And then the CRM, maybe you're coaching, they've used it, they're just not familiar with it as of right now, right? So definitely you could be coming into the training at different tiers. So when you start, you might start with other sales reps, and your training programs are going to look vastly different if you come from different backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, and I think this all kind of goes back to, because I think we're talking about, training and different strategies and all of that, right? But I think it goes back to a previous episode when we talked about just the job description in general, right? The big question is, well, how do you know how to tailor these programs, right? I mean, I think that's a fair question. How do I know that you, Morgan, need one thing, but, someone else may need, a different part of it or whatever. And I think it goes back to the job description. We write in our job descriptions, what are some of those competencies or those areas that people need? So we should be asking them about those competencies or assessing against those competencies during the hiring process. And that is so connected to what we do in onboarding, right? I think sometimes they're seen as two separate and distinct processes, but I would argue that they are very interconnected. And by getting that information during the interview, through early conversations, all of that, it can help you to understand what areas do we need to focus on. Is it Salesforce? Do they have experience in that? If not, well, then we know that they may still be a great candidate, right? And we're still going to bring them on, but that may be somewhere we need to focus our energy, and I think that it's so multifaceted. That's what I love about psychology, is you could just go on and on about it, right?
Yes, I would just talk forever.
Yeah, right. It's not just about knowing, I'm just going to give a random example. It's not just about knowing Salesforce, right? Let's say I were a salesperson who came from the Microsoft world, right? And now I'm going to a company that uses Salesforce. Well, I understand the underlying need then of a CRM system, right? I may not know Salesforce, but you don't have to teach me what the purpose is, because I know the purpose. You just need to teach me the system. Whereas some people may need to understand what the purpose is as well.
Yeah, someone might be brand new to sales, or they might come from a company that didn't use a CRM. It was maybe a lot smaller, maybe kind of more of a mom and pop shop. Those exist where they don't really have a CRM system. They kind of go off of spreadsheets and the like. I mean, you'll typically see spreadsheets no matter the company, but definitely the way in which they're used is going to be different. The CRM is going to be different. That's exactly what we talked about. Even an aptitude test, we don't use it for hiring, we use it for training more than anything, right? And oftentimes when you are choosing between candidates, you're choosing the best out of your options. You're not usually going to get that candidate that's hits all 5 points on the star. They're usually going to hit 4, maybe they have 4.5 of them. They could be 80% of the way there. In a sense, so just showing some different examples there, talking about different examples of how to visualize it, right? So they might be 80% there, but you got to get them the other 20% usually.
Right.
So it's super important. You're choosing between candidates who aren't perfect, and you're not going to find a perfect candidate.
Right. None of us are. I mean, I think that's the joy of being humans, is we're always growing and can always challenge ourselves to do and learn more. And so when I hear people say, oh, I found the perfect candidate, they meet all the boxes, I always say, you're missing something, not that it's a bad thing, like you shouldn't bring them on, but you should be curious about what their next step looks like, or how they want to grow. What are their aspirations? All of that. Because you can integrate that into the job or into the training or onboarding or whatever it is. But there is nobody's perfect.
Yeah,
Neither one of us are either, right?
No one's perfect. I mean, I'm learning every day. That is exactly why we have this podcast, right? We say stay curious for a reason, because everyone has room to grow, even your quote unquote perfect candidate. I mean, the thing I can't drive more is develop a purposeful training program for your team, because you will have immense better, higher ROI, and you will just see a much quicker, you'll see training go a lot quicker, I think, than if you just had a kind of laissez-faire type of training program. So develop a purposeful training program. Develop that with the help of those job descriptions you're writing, and make sure it aligns with the company's mission, the company's values, and the overall process of the company.
Yeah, and I'd add the resources of the company. You know, is the manager or the team, do they have the capacity at that moment in time to train or to develop in that way? Do they, and I think those are questions that companies need to ask themselves.
Bring on the experts you need to train too.
Exactly.
That's exactly why we brought a sales manager on, is because like earlier this year, is because, we have the capacity to train in the sense of like knowledge and capability, but not the time capability of things. And so to bring a sales manager on, invest the time into her to train her what we are in totality, so that she can train the people accordingly and spend the necessary time on those training programs.
Yeah.
Now, Elizabeth, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm putting you on the spot. Again, it's payback. You keep putting me on the spot. So.
I do.
What do you think of having tests or exams through someone's training?
Ooh,
have you ever experienced it or used them?
Let me think. I would say what I've used in the past, or what I guess both used and experienced, are more of kind of like knowledge checks, of, because I also understand that, like, especially when we're doing virtual, watching videos and that kind of stuff, sometimes, I mean, I'm guilty of it at times. I just kind of like let it go in the background while I'm multitasking and doing something else, or context switching, because
or you just kind of lose focus and it just goes in one ear out the rest.
Yeah. So I have definitely used kind of knowledge checks, and I'm personally, this is just my opinion, so I'm not basing this on anything in particular, no research or anything. I am not a huge fan of it being like pass or fail. I don't think that's in the same spirit as development. Like it doesn't feel the same to me. So rather, when I have built out kind of knowledge checks, there have been, if you get the question right, you get kind of a description of why it was right. And if you get it wrong, it's a description of why it was wrong. Right. And then they get to come back and try it again. So I'm not a huge fan of pass fail because again, it's not the same spirit. If we're developing people, we have to be open to imperfection.
I think it does depend on the position, the pass or fail method. But for me, like if they were to quote unquote fail, no matter even if they passed, they probably got a couple questions wrong. You still need to develop those questions so they get them right? We want people to get 100. Yeah. That's the goal of training, so that they can get 100% on that knowledge check or that exam. But perhaps it's just a knowledge of, if they quote unquote fail, the probationary period is extended, or that introductory period, it's extended. Obviously they're still going to involve themselves in training after that introductory period. The introductory period is just the really big timeline for training, right? And so, I definitely agree with you. An exam is a knowledge check. That's the purpose of it. So you're going to train in it. I wouldn't say that unless someone's really just not understanding the process and they're not a fit for the company, perhaps that's the only time that, you could truly fail a knowledge check. Well, and chances are you're going to be seeing that outside of a knowledge check or test. So, and I think that, I think there's more information to it. It's, yes, I could say, and I'm going to use you as an example, maybe you get 50% on the exam that I had put out there for you. Right.
I might, as a hiring or as a manager, say, "Hey, Morgan, you only, you only got 50%. I'm going to need you to go back, do the training again, and try to get to 100." Or I could take a more developmental approach, and I could say, "Hey, let's look at what questions you got wrong, and let's work on this together. Let's let's use it as a mentorship opportunity."
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is more successful for many reasons. You're getting the knowledge, you're building a relationship, you're building trust, you're showing vulnerability, like all of these different things. And all of that is needed to be successful in an organization, So it's not just about right or wrong. It's about what information can you pull from it.
It's understanding why it's right or wrong too.
Exactly.
So that's a big part. If you understand the reason behind something, you're more likely to do it correctly. So explaining purpose. Humans are curious. We're curious. Organizational Sherlocks, especially, we're curious. And so because of that, if you understand the purpose behind something, you're more likely to understand it more thoroughly. And so you'll be able to do it correctly or make decisions that are, connected but different, like they're a different situation, but they look moderately similar. You can make that decision better because every situation is going to be a little different, especially sales. Every customer is going to be a little different. And so how to lead them in that direction. The only time I would say that an exam has to be pass or fail is when it comes to, something medical, something that's like life or death related. I know back in the day, I think it was when I was in high school or college, something like that. I was a guide at a treetop adventure course, and we have to pass we had to pass a couple different exams, but that's because we're using devices to lower people from the course, to raise ourselves up and lower ourselves down from the course. And if we don't know how to use something, we shouldn't be using it because we're going to kill someone or ourselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would agree on that front for sure. When I was in college, I worked at a home with adults, and I had to dispense medication. So that was I had to know what I was doing, because if I didn't, again, that's could be life or death, right?
Yes, exactly.
But again, I think that in those examples, that's less about development and it's more about the tactical piece of doing the work, right? So it's
more of a hard skill.
It's more of a hard skill. You have to know how to do that. Gosh, that was anxiety provoking though. I was always worried, even though I knew what I was doing.
A little nerve-wracking, but also that exam's kind of a breath of fresh air. Like you're like, I know I'm doing this correctly.
Exactly. So validating in some ways too. Yeah,
exactly. Test your knowledge. You should be testing your knowledge every day. But doesn't mean you're any less smart than somebody else. It just means that you might have areas to improve.
I think there's just a negative connotation with tests and exams and assessments.
They bring anxiety.
They bring anxiety for people, and but I think it's all about how you present it to the candidate or present it to, a current employee, a seasoned, whatever it is. It's all about how you talk about it, if it truly is, and if the company truly is about developing people, then that should be the message you're sending. Hey, we want to have you go through this assessment or do this training and then take a test at the end because we want to help develop you. And that is the intended purpose. We want you to try your hardest. We want you to go with your gut because we want to make sure that we can help you, and I think if you can present it in that way, that tends to be more successful because it's, I'm investing in someone rather than just trying to have a warm body.
You try to reduce the anxiety. If you can reduce someone's stress in the workplace or surrounding situation, they're more likely to succeed in that situation. Exactly why I said, when I'm hiring in an interview, I make someone feel as comfortable as possible. So they just open up. I don't want someone that's just a perfect applicant in a sense. I want to hear what's going on so that I know how to develop them down the road. Knowing someone's constraints isn't a negative thing. It's just an area that you're aware of so that you can improve them. But yeah, guys, we want to hear about your training programs or how you're going to apply things Elizabeth and I have talked about in your training program, whether that be sales or another position. Training is so important. You can't go off, you can't just go off a whim when it comes to training. You really need to be super purposeful. And I will never stop saying that.
I agree. And you have to be purposeful, but you have to understand the purpose too. So make sure you understand the purpose. And if you don't, then rework it, figure out what the real purpose is. So, but This is a great conversation, Morgan. Thank you. It's a little bit rainy outside today, so it was a nice way to kind of boost the spirits a little.
There you go. There you go. Well, I'm looking forward to our next conversation because we're really going to get into kind of consumer psychology. And so, we're going to talk about how when you train someone, you need to train them about customers and the customers you have. And part of that is understanding consumer psychology. Just like we train leaders a little bit on the psychology side. I mean, if you've ever been through a management program, you learn psychology just in a different terms. Same thing for sales reps learning about their customers. And so I'm looking forward to that. And in the meantime, we want to hear about, what you guys have going on. And even if there's something Elizabeth and I can help you on when it comes to the training programs you're developing.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we will wrap it up because this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. And again, I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Remember to stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us now for every Tuesday for your next Whodunit. This is Organizational Sherlocks, closing today's case.
See you all next time.